They say a mother's love knows no bounds, that the sacrifices we make for our children will always come back to us as gratitude and respect. For 23 years, I believed this with every fiber of my being. For 23 years, I poured my heart and soul into raising my son, never imagining that one day I would discover just how wrong I had been. My name is Margaret Morrison Wilson. I am 55 years old, and I've been a widow for 23 long years. When my husband James died, our son David was just 5, a sweet little boy who needed his mother more than anything. I became both mom and dad to him, working multiple jobs, giving up my own dreams, and providing every opportunity I could afford. I thought I was building a foundation of love that would last forever. But sometimes, life shows us that our biggest efforts don't always give us what we hope for. I keep thinking about how this could happen to anyone, anywhere. Tell me in the comments where you are watching from, Faye. I love hearing from our global community. Don't forget to subscribe if you want more stories that make you think. Let me tell you about Emma's shocking discovery. It was an ordinary evening when my world completely changed. The dinner table was set as usual, warm light from the chandelier creating soft shadows around the room. Everything looked perfect, a successful family gathering, 3 generations sharing a meal together. My son David, now an executive at a big company, was bragging about the $1 million deal he'd just signed. His voice had that self-satisfied tone I'd grown used to over the years, each word chosen to show how important he was. Success had definitely changed him, though I tried not to think about that. My daughter. In-law Sandra smiled politely beside him, putting food on my plate with practiced politeness. "Mom, you should eat more," she said, her voice carrying that gentle talking down to I'd gotten used to. "Maybe David can take you abroad someday to see the world." I smiled and said nothing, cutting my food into small pieces with the careful precision of someone who had learned to make every moment count. After all these years, I'd mastered the art of keeping the peace, of not causing trouble. Just then, my elementary school grandson Billy was pointing at a math problem with a frustrated look. His little forehead wrinkled as he struggled with the numbers. Here was my chance to help, to be useful, to share what I'd learned over the years. He leaned over and said gently, "This is just a classic problem about chickens and rabbits in the same cage. Using the method I taught you, pretend they're all chickens first, then work backwards." What happened next would destroy everything I thought I knew about my own family. "Grandma is so stupid," Billy suddenly snapped impatiently in French, his young voice cutting through the air like a knife. But it was my son's response that truly broke my heart. His face instantly darkened, and he spoke to his son in even more fluent French, his words flowing with the confidence of someone who believed himself unheard and ununderstood. "Be quiet. She is just an ignorant old woman from the countryside. What could she possibly know? Just let her cook for us." The smile on my face froze, as if touched by winter frost. 23 years of sacrifice, of love, of devotion. And this is what I had raised. My heart felt like it was being squeezed by an icy hand, the pain making it difficult to draw breath. Here before me sat my son David, whom I had raised through countless hardships, changing his diapers in the dead of night and sacrificing everything for his future. Here sat my grandson Billy, whom I had cherished like the most precious treasure. They thought I could not understand their words. They believed I was simply some old countrywoman who had spent her entire life around the kitchen stove, who had never ventured beyond our small county town, who could not even speak proper English with any sophistication. They used a language they assumed was foreign to my ears to mock my supposed stupidity and ignorance right there in front of me, without the slightest restraint or consideration for my feelings. I looked at them both with new eyes. David sat there in his perfectly tailored designer suit, wearing the expensive watch I had bought him by selling our old family home. His face bearing that familiar expression of elite arrogance and barely concealed impatience with those he considered beneath his station. Billy was dressed in his expensive international school uniform, his little face showing childlike innocence, yet speaking words that cut like poisoned daggers through whatever remained of my maternal heart. And there was my daughter-in-law Sandra. Though she had not spoken those cruel words herself, the flash of contempt at the corner of her mouth was more hurtful than any verbal assault could have been. They were a family, united in their sophisticated world of international business and private schools and designer clothes. And I, this old woman who cooked their meals and cleaned their house and cared for their child while exhausting all my energy in service to them, was nothing more than an outsider in their glamorous world, a burden they could discard at will whenever convenience demanded. 30 long years stretched behind me like a trail of tears and sacrifice. My husband had died young, and I alone, working odd jobs at the textile factory during the day and selling socks at night markets after dark, sleeping less than 4 hours each night, had raised David from a crying infant into our county's first prestigious university graduate. After graduation, he had stayed in the big city and married Sandra, a sophisticated city girl with modern ideas and expensive tastes. He had promised me then that he would bring me to live comfortably, that all my years of struggle would finally be rewarded with peace and security in my old age. So I had come to live with them, believing in his promises. The so-called comfortable life he had described meant living in the converted maid's room of their 1,200 square foot apartment, getting up before dawn each morning to prepare breakfast for the family of 3, then washing clothes and cleaning house and rushing to the market for the freshest ingredients, before cooking elaborate dinners in the evening and waiting for them to return home from their important lives. I had harbored no complaints during those years. I had convinced myself that my son had made something significant of himself, that all my decades of suffering and sacrifice had been worthwhile after all. But I had never expected that my sacrifices meant absolutely nothing in their eyes. In their minds, I was simply an uneducated country old woman, a relic from a simpler time who knew nothing of the sophisticated world they inhabited. I slowly put down my chopsticks, the crisp sound of them touching the table particularly jarring in the suddenly tense atmosphere of the dining room. David frowned and looked at me with visible displeasure. "Mom, what is wrong? Does the food not taste good tonight?" I did not look at him directly. Instead, my gaze fell upon the untouched braised pork sitting in front of me. It was the best cut of pork belly I had searched 3 different markets to find that afternoon, slowly braised for 2 full hours with careful attention to every detail. His absolute favorite dish since early childhood. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm, so extraordinarily calm it felt foreign even to my own ears. "David, your company's bid for that cultural tourism town project down south has run into some serious problems. Has it not?" Instantly, the entire dining table fell into the kind of silence that precedes earthquakes and other natural disasters. The arrogance on David's face froze completely, replaced by shock and growing disbelief as he processed what I had just said. "Mom, what are you talking about exactly?" Sandra also froze in her chair, looking back and forth between me and David with an expression of utter bewilderment painted across her carefully made-up features. This particular project was the crown jewel of David's company for the entire year, absolutely crucial for his hoped, for promotion to regional director. For security reasons that had been drilled into him by his supervisors, he never mentioned specific work details at home, certainly never anything involving confidential business dealings. How could I possibly know about such things? I pulled at the corner of my mouth in what could hardly be called a smile. "Not only do I know about that situation, I also know that your biggest competitor in this matter is Skyline Group. Furthermore, your potential partner, that Mr. Johnson from Hong Kong, has already met privately with Skyline's representatives on 2 separate occasions." How could you possibly know any of this? Were you eavesdropping on my private phone calls?" David's voice shot up several octaves, tinged with embarrassed anger and something approaching genuine fear. Eavesdropping? A wave of bitter, cold laughter washed over my heart like ice water. Did I really need to resort to eavesdropping to understand what was happening in his professional life? I ignored his accusation entirely, and continued speaking in that same matter. Of factone, Mr. Johnson believes your team displays too much arrogance and lacks genuine sincerity in your business approach. Especially you personally, David. Your proposal contains 3 quite obvious logical errors in the supporting data, which made Mr. Johnson seriously question your professional competence. With a loud crash that echoed through the apartment, David shot up from his chair, the chair leg scraping against the floor with a piercing screech that seemed to embody his internal turmoil. His face had transformed from shocked surprise to something approaching deathly pallor. Every single word I had spoken hit him like a carefully aimed sledgehammer, striking precisely at his most vulnerable professional points, revealing knowledge that should have been impossible for me to possess. Those data errors I had mentioned so casually were something he had only discovered the previous night while working past midnight, and he had been planning to have his team address them first thing this morning. He had not yet had the opportunity to implement any corrections. And Mr. Johnson's harsh assessment of his attitude and approach, those were the exact words his immediate supervisor had relayed to him just that very morning during their private conference. These matters were known only to the highest levels of his company, information that no outsider could possibly have access to under normal circumstances. Yet here I was, his supposedly stupid and ignorant mother, recounting every detail with word-for-word precision that left no room for doubt or misinterpretation. He stared at me as if I were some kind of supernatural creature, his eyes filled with a mixture of genuine fear and complete confusion about the fundamental nature of reality. "Who are you exactly?" he asked, his voice trembling with emotions he could not even begin to name. I slowly stood up from my chair and straightened my old faded dress with dignity I had not displayed in many years. I did not answer his desperate question. I simply looked at him. This son I had nurtured with my life's blood and energy, who had somehow grown into something twisted and unrecognizable, and said each word with deliberate precision. "I am tired of this life. Tomorrow morning, I will be moving out of this house." "Moving out, Mom? What are you saying?" David's mind was spinning in complete chaos as he instinctively tried to argue against what seemed impossible. Where could you possibly go at your age? How would you manage to live on your own? Sandra also snapped to attention and quickly stood up to mediate the growing crisis. "That is absolutely right, Mom. Please do not take David's thoughtless words to heart." She gestured frantically at David with her eyes, silently urging him to apologize quickly before the situation spiraled completely out of control. But David remained lost in his shock and mounting fear, staring at me with intense concentration, as if trying to find some trace of the familiar and predictable in this wrinkled face that had suddenly become so foreign to him. But there was absolutely nothing recognizable remaining. The woman standing before him now displayed a calm, cold demeanor, with a detachment he had never witnessed before in all his years of knowing me. I was no longer the obedient, self-sacrificing mother whose eyes had always held nothing but unconditional love and constant worry for his well-being and future success. I had become simply a stranger announcing her departure from their lives. "I have made my decision," I said flatly, with absolutely no room for negotiation or discussion. With those words hanging in the air between us, after fitting a single bed and a small wardrobe inside, there was hardly enough room for a person to turn around comfortably. The only window faced directly toward the community dumpster area, and the air was perpetually filled with a sour, rotten smell that never seemed to dissipate completely. This cramped, malodorous space had been my place of supposedly comfortable living for all these years. "Mom!" David finally snapped out of his paralyzed shock and rushed after me, grabbing my arm with desperate strength. His voice carried a panic that he himself had not even noticed creeping into his tone. "You absolutely cannot leave us. You must explain yourself properly. How do you know about confidential company matters?" This was what truly concerned him most deeply. Not why I was angry with them, not why I wanted to leave their home, but whether the mysterious source of my knowledge somehow threatened his precious career prospects. The last trace of warmth in my heart finally turned completely cold at this realization. I did not turn around to face him. I simply, yet firmly, pried his desperate fingers away from my arm. "David." My voice carried a trace of weariness that seemed to come from somewhere much deeper than physical exhaustion. "You are a grown man now, a fully responsible adult. You should take complete responsibility for your own life and its consequences." With those final words, I ignored his continued protests, entered my small room, and closed the door firmly behind me. Outside in the main living area, I could hear Sandra's hushed scolding mixed with David's agitated arguing, along with little Billy's frightened crying as he tried to understand what was happening to his family. None of this concerned me anymore. Those days were finished forever. I opened my old wardrobe with its creaking hinges. Inside hung just a few changes of clothes, all inexpensive items purchased from street vendors over the years. I took out the canvas bag that had been my faithful companion for more than 30 years and began the simple process of packing my few belongings. There really was not very much to pack at all. All my worldly possessions combined would not even fill this small, worn backpack that had seen so many years of service. At the very bottom of the wardrobe, I felt around carefully and found a small wooden box wrapped in faded red cloth, hidden away where no one would think to look. Opening the box with trembling fingers, I revealed a yellowed black and white photograph from decades past. In the photograph, a young woman in an elegant chippewa dress, with 2 carefully braided pigtails, was smiling with radiant joy. Beside her stood a distinguished middle-aged man in a formal Zhongshan suit with refined intellectual features. Behind them loomed an impressive Western-style mansion that spoke of wealth and social prominence. The young woman in that photograph was me, captured in what seemed like another lifetime entirely. The distinguished man was my father, Robert Morrison, though he had not always gone by that name. My thoughts were instantly pulled back across the decades to a very different world. To Shanghai 30 years ago, when everything had seemed. My original name had been Margaret Morrison, and I had been born into a prominent merchant family in Chicago during an era when such things still mattered greatly. My father, Robert Morrison, had been a famous industrialist whose business empire stretched across multiple continents. As his only daughter and heir, I had lived a life of unimaginable luxury since earliest childhood, receiving the finest education money could buy, excelling in music and fine arts, and even having private tutors who taught me to speak fluent French, German, and Italian with perfect pronunciation. Everyone in our social circle had simply assumed I would eventually marry into another wealthy family of appropriate social standing and continue my privileged existence as a refined socialite, hosting charity events and attending cultural galas for the rest of my comfortable days. That predictable future had lasted until the day I met David's father, James Wilson, and everything changed forever. He had been nothing more than a poor young man from the countryside, working at one of my father's companies with nothing to his name except an unyielding spirit and burning ambition to make something better of his circumstances. Despite every rational consideration that should have prevented such foolishness, I had fallen hopelessly, completely in love with him. My father had been absolutely furious when he discovered our relationship. He had done everything within his considerable power to stop us from seeing each other. He fired James immediately, then used his extensive business connections to ensure that James could not find decent employment anywhere in the city. And he even threatened to lock me away at home until I came to my senses. But I had been utterly blinded by what I believed was true love at the time. I convinced myself that father was simply being a terrible snob, looking down on honest working people because of his own prejudices, for the sake of what I thought was the most romantic love story ever told. I had engaged in a huge, devastating fight with father, left a brief note explaining my decision, and eloped with James to his hometown in this remote small county, bringing nothing with me except my birth certificate and the clothes on my back. I had truly believed that I was marrying love itself, that nothing else in the world could possibly matter. Father had told me in no uncertain terms that once I stepped out of that house with James, I should never even think about returning. As far as he was concerned, he no longer had any daughter, and everything belonging to the Morrison family would have absolutely nothing to do with me from that moment forward. Despite his harsh words and the finality in his voice, I had left anyway, walking away without looking back even once. I had given up my surname, my identity, my wealth, my social position, absolutely everything I had ever known, and willingly followed James to live in a leaking mud house, learning to cook simple meals and keep house like any ordinary wife. I had been completely convinced that we would be happy together forever, that love would somehow be enough to sustain us through any hardship or challenge life might present. But fate, as it so often does, had very different plans for our future. When David was only 5 years old, James died suddenly in a workplace accident that took him away from us without warning. Before dying in that sterile hospital room, he had held my hand with what little strength remained and made me promise to raise our son properly, to help him succeed in ways that James himself had never been able to achieve. I had promised him with all my heart that I would do exactly that. From that terrible day forward, I had completely buried the name Margaret Morrison, along with my entire previous existence. I had become nothing more than an ordinary widow, a struggling single mother who would sacrifice absolutely everything for her son's future prospects. I had never attempted to return to Chicago, never tried to contact the Morrison family again, never even considered reaching out for help during the worst financial struggles. I had convinced myself that I would spend the remainder of my life in poverty and constant hardship, working my way slowly toward death without ever looking backward. That had been my plan until 6 months ago, when a well-dressed man claiming to be my father's personal lawyer had somehow managed to find me. He had brought news that my father had passed away approximately 1 year earlier after a long battle with illness that he had faced entirely alone. The lawyer had explained that father had never forgiven me for leaving, not until his very last day on earth, but he had also never changed his will or removed my name from any legal documents. He had left his vast business empire, all company shares and personal assets, every single thing he had built over a lifetime of hard work, directly to me as his only heir. The lawyer had told me that father's final words regarding my situation had been quite simple. Tell her to come home. Tell her to stop living such a difficult life. I finished packing my simple belongings and placed the small wooden box containing that precious photograph deep in my worn backpack, handling it like the treasure it represented. Outside my small window, I could hear the distinctive rumble of an expensive car engine, a sound quite unlike any vehicle that had ever appeared in this humble neighborhood before. I pulled back the thin curtain and saw an elegant black Rolls-Royce, clearly worth more money than most people in this county would see in their entire lifetimes, parked quietly on the street directly below my window. A distinguished middle-aged man in an impeccably tailored black suit with perfectly groomed silver hair stepped out of the driver's side, looked up toward my room window with obvious recognition, and then bowed deeply and respectfully. "Miss Morrison." His voice carried clearly through the open window, filled with the kind of reverence reserved for royalty. "Your father has been waiting for you to come home for 30 long years." I recognized that man immediately, despite the passage of so much time. His name was Thomas Butler. After 30 years had passed, he had transformed from the energetic young man I remembered into this composed, thoroughly capable middle-aged gentleman. But the deep respect that had been ingrained in his character since youth remained completely unchanged. I did not respond to his patient call. I simply pulled the curtains closed and turned away from the window. Behind me, my bedroom door was suddenly pushed open without ceremony. David and Sandra rushed into my private space, both of them having clearly witnessed the impossible luxury car parked outside their modest building. "Mom, who exactly is that person down there? Do you actually know them personally?" David's face was filled with deep suspicion and growing alarm. He instinctively understood that this car, which clearly should not exist in their simple neighborhood, was somehow directly connected to my sudden transformation, and those impossible secrets he could not begin to comprehend. Sandra went straight to the window and stared down at the Rolls. voice that gleamed with obvious wealth even in the dim evening light, her eyes growing wide with a mixture of disbelief and something that looked very much like greed. "Mom, is that expensive car actually here to pick you up?" Her voice trembled with emotions she was trying unsuccessfully to hide. I ignored both of them completely, shouldered my simple canvas bag, and headed directly toward the door without any explanations. "Stop right there." David blocked my path with quick, desperate steps. His expression had become incredibly complex, displaying confusion, anger, and underneath it all, a fear he did not want to acknowledge even to himself. "You absolutely must explain everything that is happening here tonight. What have you been hiding from me all these years? Who are those people waiting downstairs? Are they sophisticated scammers of some kind? Mom, have you somehow been deceived by criminals?" He would much rather believe that I had fallen victim to an elaborate confidence scheme than accept the possibility that I, the mother he had always looked down upon with such casual contempt, might actually have aspects of my life that he knew absolutely nothing about. I looked directly at him. This person I had once thought was closer to me than anyone else in the world, yet who now felt like a complete stranger, whose motivations I could no longer understand. "Move out of my way," I said, my voice as cold as winter ice. "I absolutely will not," David replied stubbornly, planting himself even more firmly in my path. "Not until you tell me the complete truth about what is happening. We are supposed to be family here, so why can you not tell me what is really going on? What if you get seriously hurt out there? You foolish old woman, family." What absolutely ironic words for him to use at this particular moment, when he had been calling me stupid in French at our dinner table just moments earlier. Had he been thinking of us as I did not want to waste any more precious time or energy with pointless words. I simply walked around his blocking form and headed straight for the front door of the apartment. He tried desperately to grab me again, but was stopped by Sandra, who had suddenly developed a very different perspective on the entire situation. "David, what exactly are you doing?" Sandra hissed at him urgently, her eyes still fixed on that incredible luxury car waiting patiently outside. "Cannot you see what is happening here? Mom might actually be someone quite extraordinary. Let her go immediately. Maybe this situation could work out very well for all of us. Maybe we could all benefit significantly from whatever this mysterious development might bring to our family." She did not finish that particular sentence aloud, but her increasingly greedy eyes had already revealed everything she was thinking about potential financial opportunities. David stood there looking stunned, glancing back and forth between Sandra's obvious excitement and my absolutely resolute back as I continued walking away from them, his expression changing constantly as he tried to process this impossible situation. I opened the front door of their apartment and walked out into the hallway without looking back even once. When I finally reached the street level, Uncle Thomas was already standing respectfully beside the open car door, waiting patiently for my arrival. "Miss Morrison, welcome home at last," he said gently, his eyes becoming slightly moist with emotions he had been holding back for years. I nodded my acknowledgement and bent down to settle myself into the luxurious interior of the vehicle. The moment the heavy door closed with that distinctive sound of perfect engineering, I looked through the tinted window and saw David and Sandra standing on their small balcony like two complete fools, staring down at me with expressions of absolute bewilderment. The powerful car started smoothly and soon drove away from this shabby neighborhood where I had lived for more than 30 years of my life, carrying me toward a future I had almost forgotten was possible. Inside the car, the temperature was perfectly controlled and comfortable, filled with the subtle scent of expensive leather and sophisticated aromatherapy that spoke of a world very different from the one I was leaving behind. Uncle Thomas had positioned himself respectfully in the front passenger seat. He reached into an exquisite leather briefcase and withdrew a thick stack of official documents, turning to hand them to me with appropriate ceremony. "Miss Morrison, these represent just a small portion of the asset documents that your father left specifically for you. The collection includes the transfer of 51% equity ownership in Summit Group, official deeds to 36, different properties under your name in locations around the world, and detailed account information for several Swiss banking institutions. The lawyers explained that once you have properly handled this initial portion, they will provide you with access to all the remaining assets. I flipped through the documents somewhat casually, though my heart was racing at what I was seeing. Corporate equity transfers, property deeds, international banking accounts, investment portfolios spanning multiple continents. The zeros that appeared after all those numbers were so numerous, they made my eyes blur with the sheer magnitude of what I was looking at. My father, Robert Morrison, had left me a vast business empire that was beyond anything I could have imagined, even knowing his success as I had. Positioned on top of all the legal documents was a single letter, carefully sealed and preserved. The envelope had yellowed somewhat with age, but it still bore my father's familiar, strong handwriting across the front. To my daughter, Margaret, to be opened personally by her alone. With my dearest Margaret, when you read these words, I will probably already be gone from this world. 30 long years have passed, and not a single day has gone by that I have not thought about you and wondered about your life. Back when you left with that young man, I was far too stubborn and proud, and I hurt your heart in ways I can never repair. I always believed that you would eventually come back someday, that you would return to your father's side where you belonged. But I waited and waited, until my hair turned completely white, and my health began to fail, and still I could not hear you call me Daddy just one more time. I sent people to search for you, but you seemed to have vanished completely from the earth. It was not until your husband died that I finally found some trace of your whereabouts. I learned that you were living a very difficult life, struggling just to survive. I wanted desperately to bring you back home where you belonged. But my stubborn pride and my own foolish ego kept me from taking that first step toward reconciliation. I always assumed that when you could no longer bear the hardship of your circumstances, you would naturally come back to me on your own. I was completely wrong, Margaret. I was terribly, inexcusably wrong about everything. I underestimated your own stubborn determination and overestimated my own ability to remain heartless about your situation. I do not ask for your forgiveness because I know I do not deserve it. But I hope you will take this business empire I built and use it to live well, to live the kind of life you truly deserve. Please do not continue living such a difficult existence. Your father misses you more than words can express. Scattered across the letter paper were several dried water stains that could only have come from one source. Had those been his tears, shed in loneliness during his final years? My own tears finally began falling uncontrollably, drop by drop, landing on those astronomical financial figures that suddenly seemed much less important than they had moments before. 30 years of accumulated grievance, 30 years of unrelenting hardship, 30 years of suppressed longing for the family I had lost. All of it burst forth in that single moment, like a dam that had finally given way under unbearable pressure. Just then, my old cellular phone, which I had thrown carelessly in the corner of my backpack, that ancient device I had been using for many years, suddenly began ringing with its shrill, outdated tone. On the small screen, 2 words flashed insistently. Son. I looked at that familiar number while hearing his cruel French words echoing in my memory. Vieille femme, ignorante de la campagne. I carefully wiped away my tears, composed my expression until it showed nothing at all, and pressed the decline button without hesitation. David was rapidly losing his mind with worry and confusion. After I had refused his first call, he tried calling more than 10 additional times, but I did not answer any of them. Finally, growing thoroughly annoyed with the constant interruption, I simply turned off the phone completely. Unable to locate me or get any explanation for what had happened, he vented all his mounting anger and anxiety on Sandra, as if she were somehow responsible for this impossible situation. This entire disaster is completely your fault. If you had not stopped me from preventing her departure, Mom would never have left us like this. Why are you shouting at me about this? I stopped you for your own benefit. Did you not see that incredible car outside? That was a genuine Rolls Royce. If Mom had really been deceived by criminals, would sophisticated scammers be driving that kind of expensive vehicle? I am convinced that Mom must be some kind of hidden wealthy person. If we could manage to get some financial benefit from this unexpected development, your stupid work project would not matter at all anymore. Wealthy. If my mother was actually wealthy, would she be wearing cheap clothes purchased from street vendors? Would she argue with market vendors over saving just a few cents? Would she be living in that converted maid's room with windows that do not even close properly during winter? David found the entire suggestion completely absurd. Then how do you explain her knowledge about your confidential company matters? And how do you account for her knowing such specific details? And what about that expensive car that came specifically to pick her up? Sandra shot back with growing frustration. David found himself completely speechless, unable to provide rational explanations for any of these disturbing questions. Everything about the evening was far too strange and completely beyond his ability to understand or process logically. His mind felt like a battlefield where two completely different images were fighting fiercely for dominance. On one side stood his mother's decades of obvious poverty and deliberate simplicity. On the other side were her earth-shattering revelations about his work, and that unmistakably expensive luxury car waiting outside their building. These two completely contradictory pictures battled continuously in his consciousness, giving him a splitting headache that no amount of aspirin could possibly relieve. Meanwhile, I was settling into a luxurious estate located halfway up a mountain in the exclusive suburbs of the city, a place that felt like stepping into an entirely different world. This beautiful property was my real home, the place where I truly belonged. I took a long, hot shower that washed away all the accumulated fatigue and dust of my previous life, then changed into an elegant Chanel suit that Uncle Thomas had thoughtfully prepared for my arrival. Standing before the large, full-length mirror in the master bedroom, I looked at my reflection with a sense of unreality that bordered on the dreamlike. The woman looking back at me from that mirror, though certainly showing fine lines around her eyes that spoke of years and experience, still retained clear traces of her youthful elegance and natural grace. The expertly tailored cut and obviously expensive fabric made her appear dignified and naturally noble in a way that no amount of money could purchase if the foundation was not already present. This was exactly how the Morrison family heiress should look and carry herself. Uncle Thomas knocked politely on the bedroom door and entered carefully, carrying a delicate bowl of freshly prepared bird's nest soup, a delicacy I had not tasted in more years than I cared to remember. Miss Morrison, please eat something substantial. You have not had a proper meal all day, and your body needs proper nourishment. I nodded gratefully and accepted the bowl, eating the soup slowly with small, deliberate spoonfuls. The warm, subtly sweet taste instantly soothed the restlessness that had been building in my heart throughout this emotionally exhausting day. Has everything been properly arranged at the company? I asked between careful spoonfuls. Everything has been arranged exactly according to your specifications, Uncle Thomas replied with the respectful efficiency I remembered from my childhood. Tomorrow morning at precisely 9 o'clock. There will be a full board meeting to officially announce your appointment as chairman of Summit Group. Your father had already spoken privately with several trusted longtime board members well before his passing, so there should not be any major problems or serious opposition. However, some of the newer board members who have joined the company in recent years might express some opinions or concerns about the transition. Having opinions and concerns is completely normal and expected, I replied, setting down the empty bowl with satisfaction. After all, in their eyes, I am just some inexperienced family member appearing out of nowhere, a mere housewife who knows absolutely nothing about serious business operations. Uncle Thomas looked at me with obvious concern in his expression. Miss Morrison, should I go speak with them privately beforehand to ensure they understand the situation properly? I shook my head firmly, allowing a cold smile to play across my lips. There is no need for such preliminary discussions. if I do not allow them to reveal their true nature by expressing their honest opinions, how will I know who deserves trust and who represents potential threats? What my father spent his lifetime building is not something that any random person can attempt to steal or control. My gaze instantly became incredibly sharp and focused, like a blade that had been honed to perfection. This was the edge that had been developed through 30 years of struggling at the very bottom of society, the particular sharpness that came from seeing through human nature at its worst and learning to recognize deception in all its forms. Uncle Thomas looked at me for a long moment, clearly seeing something in my expression that reassured him, then smiled with obvious relief and satisfaction. He could see that Miss Morrison had truly returned, not just physically but in every way that mattered. The next morning, David arrived at his office looking completely lost and haggard, as if he had aged several years overnight. He had not managed to sleep at all, spending the entire night staring at the ceiling with bloodshot eyes, replaying the impossible events of the previous evening and trying unsuccessfully to make sense of any of it. As soon as he entered his office and attempted to settle into his normal routine, his immediate supervisor, Director Williams, stormed in and slammed a thick document directly in his face with obvious anger. "David Wilson, look at what you have accomplished. Mr. Johnson has officially notified us that they have decided to pursue cooperation with Skyline Group instead. We are completely out of this project." Director Williams was practically spraying saliva as he shouted, his face red with embarrassment and professional frustration. "Now everyone in the entire company knows that our department lost the biggest potential deal of the year. You have made me lose face with upper management. You have made our entire company lose credibility with important clients." David's mind went completely blank with a buzzing sound that seemed to drown out everything else. He suddenly remembered exactly what I had said the previous evening with such impossible certainty. "Mr. Johnson has already met privately with Skyline's representatives twice. Mr. Johnson thinks your team is too arrogant and lacks genuine sincerity." Every single word had proven to be completely accurate, as if I had been present in those private meetings myself. "Director, I can explain." He wanted desperately to offer some kind of rational explanation, but found his throat feeling as if it had been stuffed with cotton. He could not manage to utter a single coherent word. "You can explain what exactly. Pack your personal things and get out of this building immediately." Director Williams pointed toward the door and yelled with merciless finality. David felt the world spinning around him as the reality of his situation became clear. He was being fired just because of this single project's failure. He was being ruthlessly terminated from the job that had been the foundation of his entire adult identity. He walked out of the company building in a complete daze, the bright morning sunlight so intense that he could not keep his eyes open properly. All he could think about was finding me and demanding answers about what was really happening to his life. He ran frantically to our old neighborhood, rushed upstairs taking the steps 2 at a time, and burst through the apartment door with desperate energy. The place was completely empty, cold and silent as a tomb. My small room had its door standing wide open, and everything inside had been removed completely, as if I had never lived there at all. A huge sense of panic and devastating loss instantly overwhelmed him like a crushing weight. Only at that moment did he begin to realize that the mother he had always despised and looked down upon with such casual cruelty had actually been the invisible foundation that supported his entire existence. Just as he was sinking into complete despair, his cellular phone began ringing urgently. Thinking desperately that it might be me calling, he quickly pulled the device out of his pocket. "This is the Bank of America Credit Card Center calling. We have received an official application from the primary cardholder to freeze your supplementary card account effective immediately. Additionally, regarding your mortgage account ending in 8846, the primary payment source has also submitted an application for a complete change of responsibility as of yesterday. Starting next month, you will need to make all payments yourself. Please ensure sufficient account balance to avoid negatively affecting your personal credit rating." "What did you just say?" David felt his blood turning to ice in his veins. His credit card had always been a supplementary account under my name, allowing him to maintain his lifestyle without worrying about the details of payment. His monthly mortgage payment of $1,500 had also been consistently covered by my pension and the savings I had accumulated through years of careful budgeting and sacrifice. Now I was gone, and I had systematically removed every form of financial support that had made his comfortable existence possible. David's entire world collapsed completely in that single moment of understanding. The frozen credit card meant he could no longer spend freely, as he had been accustomed to doing, maintaining his carefully constructed image as a successful middle-class professional. Having to cover his own mortgage payments meant that $1,500 per month would be an absolutely insurmountable mountain for someone who had just lost his primary source of income. He frantically tried calling me repeatedly, but my phone remained turned off and unreachable. He rushed back home and began yelling at Sandra with uncontrolled frustration. "Where is my mother? Where exactly did she go? Why did you prevent me from stopping her yesterday?" Sandra was equally terrified by this sudden turn of events, her face completely drained of color as the financial implications became clear. How was I supposed to know she was completely serious about leaving? She even canceled the mortgage payments. What are we going to use to pay next month's mortgage? Will the bank actually repossess our home? How should I possibly know? David kicked the coffee table in pure frustration, sending magazines and decorative items flying across the room. "I do not have any job now. My credit card has been canceled. So where am I supposed to get $1,500 every month?" For the first time in their marriage, the couple engaged in a heated, bitter argument that was focused entirely on money and survival rather than love or family unity. Little Billy was frightened by their shouting and began crying loudly, turning their entire apartment into a scene of complete chaos and misery. Meanwhile, I was sitting calmly in the top-floor conference room of Summit Group headquarters, being systematically scrutinized by every member of the board of directors as if I were some kind of exotic specimen. "Board members, please allow me to introduce Miss Margaret Morrison, the only daughter of our former chairman Robert Morrison. According to the former chairman's legally binding will, starting today, Miss Margaret Morrison will officially assume the position of chairman of Summit Group." Uncle Thomas stood beside me in his role as senior advisor, making this announcement with appropriate solemnity and formality. As soon as he finished speaking, a barely suppressed commotion arose throughout the conference room, like the sound of disturbed bees. All eyes focused intently on me with expressions that ranged from curious to deeply skeptical, but mostly displayed doubt and poorly concealed dismissiveness. Today I was wearing a well-tailored black business suit with my hair pulled back in an impeccably professional style. I did not speak immediately, instead choosing to look calmly at each person present, studying these individuals who controlled the vital functions of this vast business empire. A man sitting directly across from me, appearing to be in his early 50s, with an obviously shrewd face that suggested years of corporate maneuvering, was the first person to challenge my appointment directly. He was the company's vice chairman, Richard Thompson, a thoroughly untrustworthy individual who had climbed to his current position through careful scheming and strategic alliance, building rather than genuine competence. "Manager Butler, we certainly respect the former chairman's final wishes and would never question his judgment. But having a lady who apparently understands nothing whatsoever about complex company operations directly assume the chairmanship seems somewhat hasty and potentially dangerous," Richard said with a fake smile that fooled nobody present. "Summit Group is not the Morrison family's private property to be handed around casually. We have serious responsibilities to hundreds of thousands of employees and all our shareholders who depend on us for their financial security." His carefully calculated words immediately gained enthusiastic support from several other board members who saw an opportunity to advance their own interests. "Yes, Vice Chairman Thompson raises an excellent point. The chairman position is not something that just anyone can hold successfully. What exactly did Miss Morrison do before today? Does she have any relevant work experience in business management? We are certainly not unwelcoming Miss Morrison to our company, but perhaps she could start in an advisory role or as deputy general manager to familiarize herself with our business operations before taking on such enormous responsibility. One by one, they spoke with voices that sounded reasonable and concerned, hiding behind the banner of what is truly best for the company. But in reality, they were simply afraid that this unexpected outsider would somehow threaten their comfortable positions and personal interests. I did not show any sign of anger or even raise an eyebrow at their transparent attempts to undermine my authority. Vice Chairman Thompson raises a valid point. Summit Group is indeed not the Morrison family's private property to be treated carelessly. My voice was not particularly loud but carried exceptional clarity that commanded attention. This company is the empire that my father built together with all of you present, as well as hundreds of thousands of dedicated employees. I am sitting in this chair today not to claim unearned benefits, but to protect this family legacy. That means everything to me. I paused deliberately, allowing my gaze to sweep slowly over every person present in that room. I understand completely that in your eyes, I appear to be just some inexperienced family member who knows absolutely nothing about serious business. So I will not waste your valuable time with empty promises or meaningless speeches. I turned toward Uncle Thomas and gave him a small signal that we had prepared in advance. Uncle Thomas immediately began distributing a carefully prepared document to each board member present. What exactly is this? Richard picked up the document with obvious suspicion and growing alarm. When he read the document title clearly, his expression changed dramatically for the worse. Feasibility report on acquiring Skyline Group. Skyline Group. Was that not the same company that had just successfully taken away David's important project? Everyone present was completely stunned by the implications. Although Skyline Group was not quite as large as Summit in terms of overall assets, it was still a formidable competitor in the industry, and it had been gaining significant momentum in recent months. Proposing to acquire Skyline at this particular time seemed like either brilliant strategy or complete madness. Chairman Morrison, what exactly do you mean by this? Richard frowned deeply, his confidence beginning to waver. Skyline Group is currently performing very well in the market. Why would we want to acquire them now? This does not make obvious business sense. It does not make business sense, I replied with a smile that carried more than a trace of cold mockery. Vice Chairman Thompson, have you simply not been reviewing financial reports carefully enough lately? Or do you honestly think I know absolutely nothing about this industry? I stood up gracefully and walked to the large electronic screen that dominated one wall of the conference room, picking up the remote pointer with practiced ease. Skyline Group certainly appears to have recently won 3 major projects consecutively, which looks quite brilliant on the surface. But, I continued, pulling up several detailed data charts on the screen with professional precision, their cash flow situation has extremely serious problems that they are working desperately to hide. To secure these 3 high-profile projects, they have mortgaged virtually every asset they could access, resulting in a debt ratio as high as 300%. If we strike decisively now, attacking them strategically in the stock market while simultaneously cutting off every possible source of payment, within 3 months, Skyline will face a completely broken capital chain. At that point, we can acquire the entire company at approximately 1/10 of its current market value. My voice echoed clearly in the now completely silent conference room. All the board members stared at me in absolute shock, looking at the fatal data points I had identified and clearly marked on the screen. Critical information that they had never noticed, despite their supposed expertise. My analysis was precise, ruthlessly logical, and hit every strategic target with devastating accuracy. This did not sound like the work of an inexperienced housewife at all. This was clearly the product of a seasoned business hunter who had been operating successfully in this environment for many years. Perspiration began forming on Richard's forehead as the implications became clear. He looked at me with growing fear appearing in his eyes for the first time since I had entered that room. I walked back to stand directly in front of him, looking down at him from my position of authority. My voice deliberately pressed extremely low so that it was audible only to the two of us. And Vice Chairman Thompson regarding those secret financial arrangements between you and your brother, In-Laws Materials Company and Skyline Group over the past 3 years. Would you like me to have our audit department bring those records out right now for everyone to review together? Richard's body suddenly stiffened as if he had been struck by lightning, his face instantly turning the color of ash. Richard looked as if all the strength had been drained from his body, slumping helplessly in his chair, completely unable to utter a single word of protest or denial. He stared at me with eyes filled with pure terror and absolute disbelief. The financial secrets he had thought were perfectly concealed had been investigated thoroughly by this woman on her very first day in the office, exposed with surgical precision. Throughout the conference room, there was complete silence that seemed to stretch on forever. The other board members, though unable to hear clearly what had been said between us, were not foolish people. And seeing Richard's utterly devastated condition, their attitudes toward me underwent an immediate and dramatic transformation from initial contempt and doubt to genuine awe and considerable fear. This woman was clearly not someone to be challenged lightly. This was the only thought occupying every mind present in that room. Does anyone else have objections to my proposal? I returned to the main seat and looked around the table with calm authority. Not a single person spoke or even moved. Excellent. I nodded with satisfaction. Since everyone agrees with this approach, our plan to acquire Skyline begins immediately. Uncle Thomas, please handle Vice Chairman Thompson's resignation procedures after this meeting concludes. With one casual sentence, I had decided the professional fate of a group vice chairman, demonstrating the kind of power that everyone present would remember. Richard suddenly looked up, clearly wanting to plead for mercy or attempt some kind of negotiation. But when he met my absolutely cold gaze, all words died in his throat. He understood with perfect clarity that everything was finished for him. This meeting ended with my complete and total victory. We'd love to hear your thoughts and reflections in the comments below. Your insights and perspectives are what make our community truly special. If you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel to stay updated on the next captivating tale from Love Vengeance. Each like and share helps us continue to bring you stories that resonate. Thank you for spending your time with us. Until next time, take care and keep those stories close to your heart.